Yo, parish orphans and retrogrades. President Trump yesterday signed an executive order that makes IVF, in vitro fertilization, easier to do, cheaper to get. And this is a bad thing. I've brought on to the show Dr. Damon Cudihy, who is a very Catholic OBGYN, and he's been on before talking about the evils of IVF. A lot of Catholics don't know, a lot of conservatives don't know. This is not a pro-life measure. So we want to educate today and refresh. First off, I'm going to walk you guys through what the executive order accomplishes or sets out to accomplish. Secondly, we're going to say here's the Catholic position and why this is actually not pro-life. Thirdly, we're going to remind you guys, I think President Trump is legitimately ignorant on it. Dr. Damon, thanks for joining the show again. It's good to see you, my friend.
You too, Tim. It's been a little bit since we've been on the show together, but it's good to have been able to visit with you and your family, since then. And it's really an honor, and I feel a certain duty, that we talk about this again, especially in light of it being brought to the national stage as recently as yesterday.
I don't think there's anybody better in the entire country to do this with than you. So that's why we keep having you on anytime.
Well, that's kind of you can say. I don't know if I agree, but maybe I'm the most available or willing to. But I appreciate that very much, Tim.
Availability is half the battle, as Machiavelli. Yes. So what responding to from yesterday is that Trump signed an executive order on in vitro fertilization. The EP reports, here's what you should know about the procedure. On Tuesday, signed an executive order aiming to reduce the costs of in vitro fertilization, medical procedure that, thank you, helps people facing infertility build their families. And all this sounds ostensibly pro-life. Americans need reliable access to IVF and the more affordable treatment options, as the cost per cycle can range from $12,000 to $25,000, the order said. Providing support, awareness, and access to affordable fertility treatments can help these families navigate their path to parenthood with hope and confidence. Preliminarily, Dr. Damon, do you just want to take a crack at why, I think those are quotes from the EO itself, why this all sounds so rosy but isn't, just in a preliminary way?
Yes, and I think, as we did before we spoke about this, I think it is helpful at the very onset to acknowledge that the suffering of couples, particularly women, of infertility is a profound suffering, and I see that just about every day in my medical practice. It's something near and dear to my heart because of the work that I do. So I don't want to make light of that or to ignore that, and that and so acknowledging that the women who feel that they have no other option than this is because of that suffering. But that very suffering also makes them vulnerable to being exploited by the IVF business, the IVF industry. And so yeah, I think that we always need to start with acknowledging that. And then also in a similar vein, we need to acknowledge that the human dignity of these children conceived by IVF is equal to that of you and I. They are no less human beings. They are no less deserving of the full respect and full protection of the law as you and I are from the moment of their existence comes into being, even though it's in a petri dish and very, immoral circumstances. So that child, once conceived, again, is being just as much valued and loved by God as every one of us. And so we in no way are denigrating the individuals conceived by that. I think I've heard other commentators recently compare it to, as I have, just as someone that's conceived outside of a valid marriage, that's conceived in adultery, or, God forbid, someone that might have been even conceived by sexual assault, those individuals, are still equally valuable and deserving of love and protection as the rest of us. But again, on this, my take on this order that Trump signed yesterday is that it doesn't, at least now, have any policy changes. But it is still problematic, and it is clearly an endorsement of the concept of IVF. And it appears that it seeks to solicit his administration to make proposals for policy changes that ultimately would purportedly reduce the cost, which I think that's most likely going to mean ultimately cause the rest of us to pay for more of it, and make it more available, whether that's making us pay through it through insurance premiums or through other government funded programs. That's not clear, but at least right now, it doesn't appear there are any policy changes, but the fact that it's heading in that direction and it looks to be seeking that, and it does, in that language you read, give a very wholehearted endorsement of IVF, which we need to understand that that is evil. That in no way can IVF be considered pro-life, and I think we can talk a little bit more about that.
President represents both power and influence, and the superlative instance of the influence that he exerts is what's come to be called the bully pulpit.
Right, I was going to say that.
This is what's dangerous, Dr. Damon, about him endorsing it, like tonally. He's saying it's a good thing, all the language, even if we look at what the order instructed the assistant for the president for domestic policy to do. It's to give Trump a list of policy recommendations on protecting IVF access and aggressively reducing out-of-pocket health plan care costs for IVF treatment. This just says univocally with one clear voice, it's a good thing. And that's why I wanted to just start out by saying it's not a good thing.
Right, and he's taken the position that the most pro-abortion doctors would, and I think it's proper to understand that all doctors that partake in IVF are pro-abortion, because IVF is inherently a pro-abortion procedure. So he's taken the position of the political left, of the same people who endorse the gender ideology and all of the other abortion legislation that, and to a large extent, he's opposed until now. So I think we need to understand this is he's actually starting to contradict the good things that he's done in trying to undo a lot of the pro-abortion agenda of his predecessor, Biden. So we've heard what you read just now, Tim, with Trump's language, or those who wrote the order for him. I think also at the top here, it might be good to read what our Mother Church has said in the Catechism. And the paragraph I found that most clearly addresses IVF specifically is under a title called "The Gift of the Child," the gift of a child, and it's specifically paragraph 2377. It's a little bit long, but I think it's important. Techniques involving only the married couple, homologous artificial insemination and fertilization, are perhaps less reprehensible, yet remain morally unacceptable. They dissociate the sexual act from the procreative act. The act which brings the child into existence is no longer an act which two persons give themselves to one another, but one that entrusts the life. I may have missed that. So he's talking about even artificial insemination, such a relationship. It's okay. I may have missed that. Maybe the paragraph prior, 2376, techniques that entail the dissociation of husband and wife. So a shorter paragraph, 2376. I apologize. Techniques that entail the dissociation of husband and wife by the intrusion of a person other than the couple, donation of sperm, ovum, uterus, are gravely immoral. These techniques, heterologous artificial insemination and fertilization, infringe the child's right to be born of a father and mother known to him and bound to each other by marriage. They betray the spouse's, quote, right to become a father and mother only through each other. I think that suffice it to say that the church has clearly pointed out that IVF violates the natural order, and this isn't an area that the faithful Catholics can disagree on. This is not a matter of debate or prudential judgment. This is a clearly intrinsically evil action. I think is how we need to understand this from the onset. And then I think even for someone who doesn't accept the Catholic Church or the Christian faith, there are a lot of there's a lot to unpack to help anyone of goodwill and honesty to understand why it's immoral.
Bravely evil is a key term there. Not everyone has to be a moral philosopher. It's not the most profitable path. That's the path I trod. I'm a trained moral philosopher. Gravely immoral and through one another alone, referring to the spouses. That means that nature is not violated through the one well-ordered means of fertilization. And anything that violates nature is against the natural law and therefore the eternal law.
Right.
That's the shorthand. And folks have to understand that even though it seems reality, not to get into Plato's cave here, but reality tends to appear in terms of semblances. IVF seems to be pro-life, broadly speaking. Why is it not? Well, if we look at the mathematics, the moral calculus, the fact that it's a violative of nature and it's involving any more persons than the husband and the wife who are procreating through the unitive act, that means it's procreative on the spot. We don't need to get too organically.
It's dissociating that and actual, and I think that at a fundamental level, there's a certain revulsion, even by the couples that feel pressured into submitting to it. I mean, here you have the IVF clinic personnel telling the married couple that they may not have marital intercourse, that they have to abstain, precisely in preparation for this. So they're instructed to avoid, that, sacred, sacramental act of, of the marital love, for the sake of trying to maximize the sperm that the husband will then be directed to obtain by what traditional theologians described as self-abuse, masturbation. It's disgusting, but that's what the husband is instructed to do, as opposed to having intercourse with his wife, typically in a bathroom into a urine cup, often with the aid of pornography. And those are just some of the first level, moral evils that are automatically, routinely introduced to this. And so now you've taken the sperm, artificially procured, and then you've the same time, sometimes a few days earlier, sometimes the same day, you're going to take the woman's eggs artificially procured. She has been given powerful drugs to hyperstimulate her ovaries, so that rather than the natural process of ovulation releasing one egg, the intent is to create her, to cause her ovaries to produce and develop up to 12 or more eggs at once. And so they call, for a good reason, they call this ovum harvesting. They're going to be harvesting these eggs like a crop from her body. This is painful. It's a horrible thing to witness, as I have, sadly. And then, so their eggs are taken and produced in a natural way, removed from her body in a natural way. And then you have the two gametes, the egg and the sperm. And then conception is brought about. The conditions for conception to occur are brought about artificially, literally in a petri dish by an embryologist. And that's at the very beginning. And before you've even begun to get into the issues of how many children will knowingly die in the process, the overwhelming majority of them, more than 90%. But before you even get to that, just the means by which you get to that first conception of the first human embryo is already, very troubling and problematic.